Welcome, fellow Porsche fanatics. I'm super excited today. I'm in a top secret location and I have tracked down, believe it or not, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 outside 6 Carrera 3-liter cars. This is the forgotten 911. Only 3,651 of these cars were ever produced. I'm going to walk you through the car in complete detail. What changed over the years, what the various options and colors were available. It's going to be a deep dive like my other videos, but even way more niche. This really fits my nerdy interest in Porsche history. So we're going to start right here with this car that's in front of us. This is our only 1976 model. So if you don't know anything about these cars, they were introduced for 1976, and they were also offered in 1977, and they were only sold as what we call rest of world models. So unfortunately, this was the dark days. For us in America, we did not get this car. We were left out. It was quite sad. We didn't have the possibility of having this car here. Thankfully, these cars are now well past their 25th birthday. They can be legally imported, and more of these cars are coming onto our shores as people have discovered the unknown 911.
If you're a Porsche enthusiast like I am, I invite you to join our community. Just head over to pca.org and get ready to take your ownership experience to the next level. We'd appreciate it if you give us a like, comment, and subscribe. We've got lots of Porsche content coming your way. Now back to the video.
So why is it unknown? Well, there's a couple reasons it's unknown. First off, they didn't make a whole lot of them, about 3,651 cars to be exact. So there weren't a lot of them ever made. The biggest issue with these cars is because they featured a 3-liter engine, because they had rear flares, because a lot of them had a rear spoiler, and they presented this way, most of us in North America, we did something horrible, and I'm just going to apologize to the world for this. We said, oh, this is kind of like a pre-production 911 SC. No, it is not. If you know anything else about this video, you learn nothing else. This is not, I repeat, not a 911 SC. I want you to experience this car. I want you to drive this car. This is going to be more important than anything else because I can excuse you visually thinking it's a 911 SC, but you're going to drive the car. We'll do that later, and we'll talk a little bit about the magic of the car. So a little bit of backup, a little bit for you here in terms of the name Carrera as it relates to the 911. We know the very first use of the term Carrera in the 911 family, which of course was used prior with the 356, denoted a very special car, a very car at the very top of the performance range, and it came to us as the 73 Carrera RS, which will likely go down in history as one of the all-time greats in Porsche history. That car, of course, was built to homologate a race series. They continued that car on starting in 1974 with the introduction of the G model with that same mechanically fuel-injected 2.7-liter engine, and that car was made from 1974 through very early in 1976. They made what was called the Sonder model in 1976, bringing a close to the mechanically fuel-injected street cars. They introduced a car, again, the forgotten car, however, which was called the 3.0 Carrera in 1976, which is the car this whole video is going to be talking about. So what exactly is this car? Okay, so it's an impact bumper era car, and the motor shares most of its kind of bits and pieces with the then new 3-liter turbo, which was introduced in 1975. The motor type in these cars is what's called a 930-02. So it's the same basic engine case as the 3-liter turbo, but it uses 8.5-to-1 compression versus 6.5-to-1 compression of the turbo, because of course it was not turbocharged. They were rated at 200 horsepower. So if you know anything about 911 SCs, when the 911 SC came out, it was exactly the same displacement, also 3 liters, also an aluminum case. However, it was a 930-03, and then there were subsequent variations, 04, 05, 06 on the way out. What makes the car different and why they make 200 horsepower and why they feel so different predominantly has the fact that this engine, the 930-02, used the same crank as a 2.7-liter Carrera RS, as well as the same 6-bolt lighter flywheel and clutch assembly. And so they have a revier nature. They've got a more aggressive cam profile. So while they'd still use CIS, and CIS doesn't allow for a really wild cam, so it's not quite as snappy as a mechanically injected car. It has greater low-end torque with the 8.5 to 1 compression and the 3-liter. And so they feel sort of like a hybrid, if you will, like a torquier 2.7 MFI car, maybe just a little bit less throttle response, but way more revability, particularly versus the early 911 SCs. Now, before some smart aleck says, oh, Nathan doesn't know that the SCs became more powerful over time. Yes, they did. Sadly, in North America, we were relegated to the lower horsepower models. However, in Europe, starting in 1981, they did get a 204 horsepower version of the 911 SC motor. However, there's a couple distinctions that happened along with that. The 911 SC is a slightly heavier car. 911 SCs are a couple hundred pounds heavier. These cars officially per Porsche specification were 2,450 pounds, give or take. SCs were more in the 2,650 to 2,700 pounds. So even versus the later 204 horsepower rest of world 911 SC, they have a heavier crank, heavier clutch and flywheel. So while they have a whopping 4 more horsepower, they're also pushing a little bit more weight, and they don't have that same revvy nature, slightly flatter cams. And so this car just feels like I can't wait to drive the car, and hopefully I can emote through my own lens how this car feels. If you've watched my 911 SC video, you know I definitely know how a 911 SC drives, and they're also a fabulous car, but very distinct. So lots of rambling. I just want to put that to bed. Even a good friend of mine who's very knowledgeable, and I won't call him out by name, he actually told me the other day, oh yeah, I'm going to do a write-up on these cars. They're kind of like the pre-production SC, and I was like, no, you're wrong. So I leave you with nothing else. That's it. One other thing I want to talk about that we haven't covered a little bit is how did these cars come to be here in the U.S.? We're at an undisclosed location here in the U.S., and we have so many of these cars. How did this happen? Well, I want to talk a little bit about the history of these cars. Again, they were not sold here in North America. They were sold in other markets. However, they predominantly came two ways. The most common way in period that they came, if we know a little bit about the history, starting in about 1980 and coming to a hard stop at the end of 1985 due to exchange rate issues, we had what we called derisively the gray market era. And this was an era where private individuals could go over to Germany, buy a car directly from the factory, import the car into the US, go through a federalization process, and sell that car at a profit for less than the new car dealers could sell a car. This was an interesting time, and one of the reasons they were labeled gray market was the fact that dealers were mad. I mean, you can imagine you're a dealer, you're selling a new 911 SC, and some private individual down the road can bring an SC in for thousands of dollars less, make the profit. So what they did is they called that car gray market. Oftentimes they wouldn't honor the warranty, and they talked bad about the cars because it was affecting their business. Now, there was kind of basically two ways those cars came in that was good, and maybe one way that was bad. A person operating with high integrity made the modifications. They didn't damage the car, but profit motive being what it is, many times those modifications were carried out poorly. Now, if you know, these cars were only 1976 and 1977 prior to the big gray market boom. So then why did these cars come in? Well, they came in, and this is maybe one of the reasons that the idea that these are just a precursor to the SC came about, is if you can imagine, it's 1981, you want a new 911 SC, you can't quite swing it, you go to a gray market guy because it's going to be a little bit less, it's still a little bit out of your budget, but he says to you, hey, I can get a used, similar to an SC over in Germany, I'll bring one in. So they bought these cars as 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old used cars, and then they brought them in, federalized them in period. Now, sadly, many of those cars were in pretty rough shape even when they came. The Germans aren't fools. They were selling kind of their cars that were a little bit banged up. And so a lot of the cars came in then. Those are the ones you'll typically see with US spec headlights. You'll see them with US spec rear bumpers. And oftentimes you'll see suspect modifications like door bars added to the doors improperly. You'll see a US speedometer, things like that. So that's a lot of the cars that are here. And then, of course, now as these cars are becoming more discovered, people are hunting for these cars in some of those original markets. They're traveling to Europe and attempting to buy cars. So of the cars that we have here today, it's about a 50-50 mix of cars that were recently brought in the last few years versus cars that have been here in the U.S. since the early 1980s. So just a little background on how these cars came to be here stateside. Okay, so let's talk about this car. This is our earliest car in our collection. It, of course, is a coupe. These came in two configurations, a coupe or a Targa. No, they did not offer a cabriolet in the Carrera 3-liter, sadly. The cabriolet did not come back out till '83. So this car is a sunroof coupe. Sunroofs were optional. These were the top normally aspirated car at the time. So even though, believe it or not, sunroofs were not that common on rest of world cars in this era, because this was the most expensive model they were selling, they very, very commonly came with sunroofs. More common than, for example, in a standard 911 or 911S configuration. A couple things that were unique to this car versus the 911S of period is you get the rear flared fender. I think this is one of the major reasons people think, oh, it's like a 911SC because it has, again, shares the same rear fender with an SC. It's also the same fender that they were sharing with the outgoing MFI Carrera. The only difference between the fender on this car and the 74 or 75, or I should say 74 Carrera, the very earliest 74 Carrera shared the fender profile with the 73. All of these have the later profile, which is akin to a 911SC fender flare. Moving to the back of the car, they did come out with a rear spoiler on these cars. The spoiler was optional, so many of these cars will not have a spoiler. We'll feature some of those a little bit later, but because this car has a spoiler, we'll talk a little bit about it. This is the official whale tail, if you will. A lot of people use the wrong term. They'll call a turbo tail a whale tail. This is officially what we would have called the whale tail. However, I would argue this one's slightly incorrect. I am of the opinion, and of course this is always hotly debated in the Porsche world, but this should not have this rear grille here. I'm also of the opinion this is a 77, and it should come with a different tail, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this rear spoiler is the one people most commonly associate with the Carrera 3-liter. This particular car's got a couple other things I like. It's got a rear wiper. Oddly enough, I think 3 of the cars here today have rear wipers. Again, because they were the top line edition, whoever ordered this car generally was more affluent, they were doing well, and they were checking more boxes. So let's walk around to the back of the car. One of the big giveaways that you have a Carrera 3-liter is a very distinctive badge. One of my favorite things about this car is that Carrera 3-liter badge. It's a lovely, lovely piece. While we're at the back, we'll also talk a little bit about the rear bumpers. Because these were never sold in the US, they always had these smaller rear bumper overriders. So again, I recognize the majority of my audience is here in North America. If you were in another market, you always got these lovely rear overriders. Unfortunately, in the US, we got these big, nasty rear pillows to meet safety requirements in the US. Because this car was never sold here, it always had these smaller overriders. But there's one big exception. A large number of these cars were brought over in what we call the gray market era in the US. And at that point, they still needed to be federalized. And so oftentimes you will find these cars with the larger US-style rear overriders. Those, of course, would not be correct, but would be period correct, because those are what they did to meet standard. Same with, like, for example, the taillight lenses. You'll note it's got orange taillight lenses. That would be appropriate for a European car. However, when they were brought in and had to be federalized in period, they often would have switched them to red. A couple other things you'll notice, wheel fitment. So on 76s, what's interesting about Carrera 3, there's lots of changes even though they only made them for 2 model years. So in 1976, the standard wheel, believe it or not, was a 15-inch Fuchs, and it was a 6-inch in the front and 7-inch in the rear. And by option, you could order it with a 7-inch front and 8-inch rear, which is what this particular car does feature. You could also have them black center, or you could have a gold center on those wheels, were an option code available at the time. So you'll see them with these. Interestingly enough, in 77, and we'll talk about that when we get there, the wheel choices completely changed. The other thing that you could get in period, which is sort of funny, so essentially they had 3 wheel choices. They had 6 and 7, 15s, 15, 7s and 8s, and then just to confuse us further, you could get 15, 7, and 8 with what was then the brand new Pirelli P7, which was kind of the holy grail tire at the time, in a 50 series fitment. So a 50 series on the front, a 55 series on the back. And because it had a lower overall rolling diameter, lowered the car 16 millimeters and required the use of a different specification speedometer. So you can check in with our friends at the Carrera 3-liter registry. They'll give you some detail if you're ever curious how your car came. There's actually a completely separate part number for cars that actually came originally in '76 with P7s. A couple other things that I just call out as I see them. They were standard equipment with black window trim. These would have been anodized black. This particular car, unfortunately, every car we have here today is predominantly restored. These have been refinished black. They're not anodized black, but we'll feature a car that does. You can kind of see what that's going to look like. However, as a no-cost option, you could specify bright window trim if that was of interest to you. This car, again, specified with black. One other thing that I love that really separates these cars from 911 SCs, the last of the air-cooled 911s to have rear pop-out windows. 911 SC, they went away from those. Oh, breaks my heart. So lovely driving these cars, particularly a sunroof car, sunroof open, rear pop-outs out. They don't buff it. Wonderful. You'll note the location of the front antenna on the car, which is here. One way to tell how the car was likely originally optioned, if it's on the right-hand side, that means it originally came with a power antenna. If it's on the left side, it would be a mechanical antenna. Antennas were not standard equipment, so if you had a very basic model, it might not even have an antenna at all. Or, for example, if it's ever had collision repair, rust repair, sometimes the fenders have been replaced. So don't always count on that. Oftentimes you'll find that maybe the fender's been replaced and it no longer has the antenna in the correct spot. I even saw one the other day, believe it or not, it had an antenna on both sides. Ooh, hurt my heart. Someone just wasn't paying any attention. Moving to the front of the car, again, for my North American audience, they always came with H4 headlights because, again, they were a European or rest of world specification. However, if the car was a gray market car in period, it oftentimes would have had sugar scoops installed. So, but H4s would have been correct. Standard equipment was the headlight washers, which are the snorkel style. So if you ever see one that does not have the snorkel style headlights, the front bumper has likely been repaired or replaced. Sometimes what people did is they wanted to update these cars. Hard to believe now, but they wanted to look like they had the cooler new car. And so I've seen examples where people say, oh, that kind of dates the car, and they put the flatter style, which came out starting in 1979. Fog lights on the front were optional. The vast majority of the cars have them. Again, they were fairly well optioned cars. Like this car is an example. I mean, this car came from the factory with a power sunroof, a power antenna, power windows, fog lights, 7 and 8 inch Fuchs, spoilers. So this was a pretty well optioned car. So that's kind of a little bit 76s. We'll dive into what some of the other differences are when we go to the inside of the car. But let's jump over to a 77 because I want to call out some of the exterior differences and a couple things that are notable. You'll notice this car does not have a rear spoiler, which I think is quite lovely. Although I will say my favorite spoiler of all time for these cars is the whale tail on these, although without the vent. Should have not the vent. Okay, so this is a non-spoiler car. You'll also notice, again, wheel choices completely changed in 77, which is funny, with the introduction of the 16-inch Fuchs. So these originally would have come on 16-inch Fuchs, and they would have come on 6 and 7-inch Fuchs. I believe this car is riding on 7 and 8-inch Fuchs. Don't act like I don't know, but the owner of this car just prefers this setup. I think 7 and 8, very common upgrade. You can see how this car is. So that's one of the big changes. So one way to tell you've got a 77 from the outside, if someone hasn't changed them, if it's got 16-inch Fuchs, it's a 77. One of the other dead giveaways, if you ever see a 3-liter Carrera with cookie cutters. Gasp, what? What are you talking about? Yes, believe it or not, in 77, it's kind of weird. They actually decontented the cars a little bit. Instead of getting 6 and 7-inch Fuchs 15s, they said, nah, we'll just offer the cast wheels. You'll get 6 and 7-inch, 15-inch cookie cutters, which I think are kind of lovely, kind of goofy, kind of different. Not everybody loves them. But that's kind of your number one spotter's guide that you've got a 77. Oddly enough, today we only have one 76 in the room. So frankly, these cars are rare enough. I wouldn't necessarily hunt down any particular year. More of the differences you'll spot on the inside of the cars. Let's jump over to this Targa. We already talked about the coupe. We already talked about there's not a cabriolet, sadly. However, they do have the Targa, which is one of my favorite configurations. And thankfully, we had someone bring us one of these cars. Mostly coupes here today, but they did come in Targas. In fact, I'm going to reference this because I just can't remember production numbers on Targas. Looks like they made 469 in 76 and 636 in 1977. So just over 1,000, 1,105 Targas. More rare coupes, 2546. So if you're a rarity nerd, you want a Targa. What do I like about Targas? They're really sublime. As you likely know, I live in Seattle. We don't get a lot of sun. And so to me, they're sublime. Roof off, heat on, windows up, and kind of a cool fall morning. They're just lovely. I wish we had a 76 Targa. The one quick spotter's guide, whether you have a 76 or 77 and a Targa. 76 is the last year they have opening vent windows. Porsche, if you're watching, I would love an old school car with opening vent windows. Can you imagine a new 992 Targa with opening front vent windows? Oh, it'd be so lovely. 77, they went to a fixed glass. In terms of Targas, they're fabulous cars. The things to look out for on Targas, the thing to know about a good Targa, this is more important than anything else, is body integrity on a Targa. Targas do not take kindly to not being perfectly square. So if you want your Targa top to fit well, start with a car that's never had a collision damage or collision work, or at least has been repaired to a very, very high standard. You even get a few millimeters out on the front. These things twist and the tops don't fit well and they become noisy. But lovely cars. So again, if you're a rarity freak, start looking at Targas. Let's do this. Let's jump into, we're going to walk back to the 76. We're going to talk a little bit about interior, what changes 76 to 77, what the possibilities were. So let's walk backwards here. We'll come back to this nice black 76. Again, lovely Targa. I love it. Okay, let's jump in and talk interiors on these cars. Oddly enough, again, they only made this car for 2 years, but they made a lot of changes, and a lot of the really obvious changes happen on the interior. So let's jump in on this, our only 1976 model. Let's jump in here and show a few things that are going to be kind of a bit unique. A couple things. One quick spotter's guide. If you're a real nerd and want a real low option specification car, ideally you're probably going to want a 76 model, because the 76 is the only year, believe it or not, you could get crank windows. Unfortunately, this car is heavily optioned from the factory. It did come with power windows, but if you ever see one with crank windows, it's a 76. For whatever reason, they made power windows standard in 1977. A couple other things that are going to be really apparent that you're in a 1976 is the 76 has my favorite. It's a one-year only dash. It is a dash without the useless center vent. Why do I call it useless? Well, frankly, for a couple reasons. All of these cars, of course, came standard with heat, and customers all the time say to me, hey, something's wrong with my heat. I can't get any heat out of the center vents. Believe it or not, no air-cooled Porsche 911 prior to the 964 allowed you to have heat out the center vent. Porsche, what were you possibly thinking? Of course, the center vent was exclusively used for the air conditioning system, which was pretty much worthless. So thankfully, we actually have a couple cars here, I think, that have AC. We'll talk about that. So if you want AC, it was a possibility. But please, please, please do not assume it's going to work as new as your Chevy Suburban. I promise you it never, ever will. A couple other things that are going to be notable on these cars in terms of that are different. If you look at the seats, in 1976, they used the same style seat from 74 and 75. The only difference would be the backrest release knob is square as opposed to round, is what Porsche used in 1974 and 1975. But the biggest visual change, and this is nice because you can spot this from 50 yards away, is if you look at the back of the headrest, it's smooth. There was not a continuation of the fabric. So I'm going to show you what that looks like starting in 1977. The other difference is in the rear seat of these cars. They still had the backrest here, which was smooth. and ran horizontally. It switches the other direction starting in 1977. So just a couple quick visual changes in the years. Other things about these cars that are kind of interesting or unique, all of them came from the factory with auto heat. So my video guy is going to show you what auto heat looks like. This was Porsche's attempt in period to be a luxury brand. I'm not sure what the heck they were thinking here either. However, in theory, cough cough theory, what this system did is you use this nice little dial here, and as you wanted to adjust heat, you'd go 2, 3, 4, 5, and there was some arbitrary amount of heat released. Essentially what it did is it just has a little electric motor that opens and closes the flaps, and it has a temperature sensor which lives above the rearview mirror, which is here. So if you ever wonder what this little rubber nipple hanging down, that's the temperature sensor for the auto heat. It works about as well as you would expect, and I'm going to laugh, but I would much rather have manual heat, but believe it or not, every Carrera 3-liter has this auto heat system. In terms of other things, all of them came standard with the 3-spoke steering wheel. A lot of people associate with the 911 SC. Of course, this design debuted in 1974 as a standard wheel in the 74 Carrera, or the optional wheel in the regular 911 or 911S. However, these are not what we call the fat grip wheels. They all came with the standard concentric or non-concentric design, and not the same fat grip, unfortunately. They all also came with this sort of the cheapy plastic shift knob here. Porsche phased out the nicer sort of bakelite looking knob in 1975. Radios were always an option in these cars. There was no standard radio. Of course, since they were European, there were, I think, 3 optional Blaupunkt radios that were available. However, they were also available with no radio at all. Again, on a 1976 model year car, they actually should have door speakers if the car was ever optioned with a radio. So, for example, if I were judging this car, I would probably call out the fact it's not cut for front speakers. I don't have the C of A in front of me, but I likely think it originally came with front speakers because it was optioned with a power antenna and does have rear speaker perforations on the rear deck. So when this car was refinished, someone probably just elected not to install front speakers in the car. But other than that, it's just kind of business as usual as your typical air-cooled 911, a really nice, down-to-earth place to do business. Let's go next door. We're going to look at this 77 here. And I want to show you a couple different possibilities. This one in particular I want to call out because it's got a black interior. And this one actually is sort of a mix of a restored and original car, so it has some more original features. So again, 1977, you're going to notice some pretty big changes if you're a nerd like me. If you're not a nerd, you'll think this guy's nuts. But one of the biggest changes you're going to note, we'll start with the door, was for theft reasons, Porsche went to this style lock knob. It's a knurled lock knob. Before, you would just pull this knob up. Well, they didn't like the fact people could basically reach in with a coat hanger or something and pull the knob up. And so for security reasons, this is the design that they went to. They also changed the stitch pattern on the door panels. You'll notice kind of the vertical, or kind of 30-degree angle vertical stitch pattern on the door panels. And then if you look at the headrest there, you'll see that the fabric and the design continues to the top of the headrest. So again, a really good visual indicator as you walk up to a car, whether it's a 76 or 77, would be that style. You'll also notice this car's got pinstripe velour, which was a new option for 1977. Kind of a cool retro period piece. In fact, one of the things I like about this car is this is an original interior. So these are original pinstripe with kind of sort of a nice soft patina to them. It's quite lovely, actually. I'm kind of that person who likes more original things. So those are some of the differences that you're going to spot. And then the other big difference is if you notice the center of the dash right there, it's going to have a center vent. So again, weirdly enough though, if you had a 77 with no AC, it really had almost no function. So you just have it there to, I'm not quite sure why. But again, you'll notice power windows, again, those were standard for 1977. Let's walk over to this yellow car. This one's got some really interesting things that are definitely worthy of a call out. So this interior on this car is in a color called cork. Now cork has got a very heavy sort of pigskin texture. This car the seats have been done in a cork vinyl. And the vinyl actually is real easy to spot because it even has more texture and grain than the original leather. One of the things that's interesting about cork in particular, a lot of people like it. It's not my personal favorite, and the reason for this is that this was an era, I'm not sure who was in charge in Porsche interiors at the time, they weren't that concerned about everything matching. And so oftentimes cars were specified, for example, with leather front seats. That was an option on these cars, commonly chosen. Again, it was a top-level car. And if you ordered front leather seats, they didn't concern themselves with the fact those front leather seats didn't match all the other grains in the vinyl in the car. So it's interesting, if you have a front leather car, you'll have leather front seats, they'll have much less texture and graining than vinyl. And if you, for example, flip to the rear seats, unless it was specified, would have almost always been vinyl. So you can see what that texture looks like. So in this particular car, someone took these sport seats and had them redone in vinyl, and then they do match the rear seats. You can see our camera guy's struggling with that seat. That's very common, and this is actually a good thing. I'm going to point this out. This car does have the sport seats, and I love these sport seats. They're kind of commonly called the tombstone style sport seats. Lots of people confuse these sport seats with the 81 to 84 SC style, or oftentimes I'll see incorrect styles put in these cars. These are radically different, they're radically better, they're great. If you can't spot the differences, the easiest way to spot the differences, they have a recline knob, or a lever on the side, not a knob. The later ones have like a rolling knob about where your hip would be. These have a release lever that says Recaro on the top of it. But they have much deeper bolstering, much more aggressive bolstering. I will be honest though and say if you're of a larger stature, you're going to find these seats more uncomfortable. They also commonly, you'll notice that they don't like to come forward very well. My poor video guy was struggling with that. Oftentimes the mechanisms fail, particularly on the inner side, and they won't pull back. But even when they're functioning well, because of the size of this bolster, they don't actually come forward very far. So they're, in practical use, kind of hard to use, but they are so lovely. Oh, I just love them. The other thing to note is these cars have a deep, deep pile sliver knit carpet, which I'll jokingly call shag. A lot of people say, that can't be factory. Yes, it is. This car actually still has its original carpet. I have yet to find anyone in the aftermarket make a reproduction of that. So most of the cars we're going to feature today being restored have incorrect carpets in them. But if you're a nerd for details, this is what the carpet should look like in one of these. Actually, I don't find it visually all that appealing, but it is correct. It's what they did. It's 1977, baby. So kind of the way it goes. A couple other things you'll notice as optional. They came standard with a white headliner. A black headliner was optional. The vast majority of the cars you'll see out there have a white headliner. Oftentimes when they're restored, very, very commonly do I find people just will put in a black headliner. So that's a little about the interior on the cars. Oh, you'll also note this is a factory AC car. So you'll see what these factory AC controls look like. They're here in the center console. You'll notice the period Blaupunkt radio. So this would have been, I think this is a Bamberg. I think this is one of the optional possible radios in period. It's got the little dictaphone. Kind of a fun and interesting piece. Okay, well, we showed you black interior, we showed you cork. But if you watch my videos, you know my favorite interior color is red. And the more red, the better. And did Porsche have it right in this era with lobster? If you're shy or you don't like controversy, this is not your interior, but lobster is, oh, so good. Again, you can tell this is a 77. We've got the pinstripe, which was newly available for 77, coming fully up the headrest. We have the lock post there. We've got the heavy velour sliver knit carpet. This is a really nice interior on this car. The owner of this car, I'm just enthralled with this particular interior. So earlier I was saying, I want that 76 Targa with bright trim, but if it had lobster interior, I just might take that as well. So I just keep putting it out there. Hopefully someone will take me up on it. Gorgeous car. I think this is the best interior they offered. Let's jump on over to that Targa. Again, this is a fully restored car. It's very, very well done. You can see they did the pinstripe as well. And then this car, again, radio, but no AC. This is called a C-Box. These were factory accessories, and they were actually sold by a company called C-Box back in the day. Very, very common period piece. You'll see those. And I guess this is Porsche just calling out their core demographic was physicians in period. You could dictate on your drive home. So I thought that was a pretty funny. Not quite as cool as having an 8-track in period, but certainly an interesting piece for sure. I'm not quite sure when you would use that, but God bless they made it. Trying to think what else I want to call it on the interior. Oh, actually, let's call it these speaker grills, because the black one we looked at had incorrectly basically deleted the speaker grills. That's what the correct speaker grills should look like on these cars. Again, in period, so many people changed out radios and speakers. If you're not a purist, hey, do what you want to do, but if you want it to look correct, that's kind of what they should look like. So that's a little bit about interiors on these cars. Let's jump up into the front trunk. Okay, now we're getting really nerdy, people. We're going to talk about the front trunk. And no, we're not going to call it a frunk today. It's the front trunk on these cars. We're going to start with this car because it's our only 1976, and there's a pretty big change that happened for 1977, which was the introduction of the brake booster. And so we got vacuum-assisted brakes starting in 1977. So you'll notice on this 76, we do not have the large brake booster you'll find in the later years. So practical reasons or measures, a 77 will stop a little bit better with a little bit lighter effort. No, I don't think it took away the feel. They still feel lovely. So for braking performance, slight edge to a 77. But remember how earlier in the video I said if you have a beautiful 77 Targa, scratch that. Reminds me why I want a 76 Targa. We get the vent windows, which I love, but more importantly, 76 is the last year you can buy a Targa and put the Targa roof unfolded in the front trunk because you don't have the brake booster. That's how Porsche designed that Targa top to work. You can slide it right in and it's lovely. You should never fold a Targa top, it ruins them. So 76 Targa for the win. Let's jump on over to this 77. I want to call it a couple things that I like about this car because it's more original. This is actually an original carpet, and so while it does show some wear and age and patina, you'll notice there's lays in here different. Whenever you buy these aftermarket, the ones they're selling now, they're just a lighter weight and they don't lay nice, and it drives me crazy. So this is how they originally looked. Yes, it looks like it was a Home Depot project. This is what Porsche did in period. Another thing that is correct about this car that you'll note is the trunk carpet was cut out for the VIN tag. And then one of the things that they did in period was they actually, let's see if I can unsnap this so I can show this to you. This car was delivered originally in Belgium. You can see kind of it got its own country tag here. But you can see the VIN tag. What Porsche did is they painted around the VIN tag black because when they cut around the carpet, if you had a brightly colored exterior, they didn't want kind of a shocking blast of yellow or orange or red or what have you. And I get a lot of questions, for example, with my US like 911 SC or 3.2 Carrera owners. They say, well, why is one section of my trunk painted black? They just did it on every car regardless of market, even though we did not get this tag on a North American delivered car. Of course, all these cars got it. Before we leave, I'm going to have my video guy come back in on this VIN tag because there's something really, really interesting. I want you to zoom in right here, and I want you to notice the model type. And this is a thing that gets a lot of questions. This is one of the reasons people commonly thought these were kind of a prototype of the 911 SC, because the model type, it calls the car a 911 SC. Okay, so what the heck is going on? We know this is not a 911 SC. If you know a little about Porsche history, in 1973, with the introduction of the famous 2.7 RS, originally Porsche wanted to call that car the 911S 2.7, and they decided, well, because it was so much more expensive, they needed to give it kind of its own name, but they didn't want to create a whole new naming structure for it for homologation purposes. So they just 911S. They added the C to stand for Carrera, and that continued forward on the 73 RS, the 74 through 76 2.7 liter MFI, as well as the 3-liter Carreras, because essentially what they were, 911S, Carrera, so SC. So a little different, whereas in 1978 they decided every version of the 911 was called the Super Carrera, effectively kind of denigrating the value of that name. So think of these cars as the end of the really, really sort of special nomenclature where they were something distinctly separate from a regular 911. Okay, so on the next car here, what I did is I actually pulled out the trunk carpet so I could show you a more naked view, if you will, of what these should look like. The first thing I want to call your attention to on the underside of the lid is, of course, the option code sticker. Oh, damn it, wait, there isn't one. I get that question all the time. They'll say, where's the option code sticker? Well, folks, it didn't debut until 1982. So if you're looking for it, you're going to be looking a long time. There was no option code sticker. The only way to know how your car was originally built was to get information from Porsche, or if you're really lucky, have original build paperwork on the car. So a couple things about the front trunks on these cars. This car has been restored, but the trunk is largely original, which I like. So a couple things that are kind of fun to note. You'll notice how the trunks are finished out on these cars. They were never finished out to the same standard as the exterior. Oftentimes when people restore these cars, they will refinish the inside of the trunk with the shiny and the paint quality like the rest of the car. If it's your car and that's how you want to do it, hey, knock yourself out. But if you want it to be correct, it will be finished just kind of a blast of color. It's sort of dependent on how Dieter was feeling that day. Some cars have a little more paint than others. However, they never were fully finished out. So just kind of a fairly flat blast of color, and you'll see primer and those kinds of things in the corners. I get a lot of questions about things such as, you'll notice sort of the brown, back here, what this is. This was just the original glue. Originally the carpets were glued down on the sides. So that's what that residue is there. If the shock towers and everything are original, they were painted black, and then they had kind of a black texturized sort of undercoating or body schutz material in those. That would be correct. I'm also a nerd for how these tanks should be finished. So this is an original tank. It's had a little bit of a spot repair here, but kind of if you see this, it's a body schutz, it's sprayed on, it's heavily texturized, and it should be kind of a light gray. They kind of, as they age, they get a little more color to them, but this would be correct for how the tanks should be done. This is not going to be a full inspection video. If you want to watch an inspection video, I do most of everything I cover. So again, it's not a 911SC, but most everything I cover on the 911SC would be applicable to these cars. In fact, essentially everything in that video. So if you want to see an inspection video, 911SC, we have a chassis inspection. It's going to be very, very related to these cars, and I dive into what this should all look like. A couple other things that we're going to call out. This is what the spare tires should look like. They would be a temporary use Vredestein. They would have come with an inflation kit. I'll show you what that looks like. In this era, most parts that Porsche used have date codes. I'll tell you how to read date codes on various different parts, but here's one that's really simple. There's a date code, for example, on the spare tire. So you can see this spare tire has a date code 44th week of 80, so that would be 1980. So this car fails. That is an incorrect spare tire for that car. Again, nobody cares. It's exactly the same, but it should have a date code. This car, I think, was produced September era of 76, so it should have a date code, July, August, maybe September, if it's original to the car. Because they all did have these snorkel headlight washers, they should have a pump up here for the headlight washers. This silly thing is unobtainium. They almost never work. In fact, this one's not even hooked up. I do like the snorkels. The nerd in me would probably make it all function, but that's what that should look like. They all use the same Bilstein jack, which is mounted here. It's got a little rubber tie down. And again, you'll note the VIN plate here with the cutout, and you'll notice this carpet actually is still glued. No one's ever unglued it, which is kind of nice, actually. You'll notice VIN tags here, so you can see what the VIN tag looks like. So you can tell this car, they start with 911, and then 7 denotes the fact that it's a 1977 model year. The first 6 here denotes the fact that it's a Carrera, and then there's your sequential build information. So this is what some people historically would have called the 230th 1977 build, but they would be wrong. They actually didn't start building until VIN 11, so this would be the 220th 1977 3-liter Carrera Coupe. Targas have a different VIN number. The way you can tell if a Targa VIN number is after the, I should have called that out, but so we'll come back to this. So a Targa would have a 1 after this one, so it would be a 6-1, and then the last 4 would be production. So if you ever want to know if your car starter life is a Coupe or a Targa, if you can't tell, you might need more help than this video can provide, but I've actually, believe it or not, seen Targas converted back into coupes, so anything is certainly possible. So there's a pretty good overview on the trunk. Next, we're going to jump into engine compartment, so let's walk to the back. The business end. We start this whole video, we talk about the 3-liter Carrera. Well, obviously, what's most important about this car is the engine. Of course, this is where the secret sauce is. One thing I want to talk about, let's talk secret sauce. A lot of people say, oh gosh, Nathan, you're getting in the weeds. Does this stuff all matter? Here's the deal. All 911s are amazing cars. So if you own a 911 and you're watching this video, you're a very, very lucky individual. God bless you. With that said, throughout the years, Porsche has made a bunch of different variants, and they never change all that much, a little bit here, a little bit there, but somehow they just, in some models, they just get the formula right. I would argue, for example, the 2.2-liter 911E and 911S cars, the mechanically injected 2.7-liter cars, the 993 RS motors. I mean, certain motors are just, this car, very, very similar. Again, on paper, you think, it's a little bit here, a little bit there. When you drive the car, just the revvy nature. So what makes it so special? Let's look at kind of an example engine bay, what they would look like. First thing most eagle-eyed people will spot on these cars is they originally came with a 5-blade fan. This was a period of time where Porsche went to the 5-blade fan, 1976 and 1977. You oftentimes won't see them because they're out of favor. People feel like they don't move as much air. Well, in fact, they don't move as much air. So a lot of times people will convert them to 11-blade fan. But if you're being a stickler for originality, we'll have a 5-blade fan. This particular car is a little more crowded, so we're going to show you a couple other engine bays because it's an AC car. But again, interesting enough, remember this car was not sold in North America. In North America, our average buyer was doctors and attorneys and people like that. We have hot climates like Texas and Florida and California. And so air conditioning was fairly common by this era. In Germany, in period, air conditioning was still quite rare. They've got a very temperate climate. But this was the most expensive car in period. So a wealthy banker probably ordered this car. He was probably a little bit older. Maybe he ate too much schnitzel, was a little bit heavier, and he's like, I gotta have some air conditioning. I personally prefer one without air conditioning. And no, they don't work particularly well. God bless you. But kind of cool to see. Let's jump back to an engine bay that's a little bit easier to spot some details, a little bit less crowded. So we're gonna walk around to this black car. Let me pop the engine lid on this car. I think it is already popped. As an aside, if you have a rear wiper car, please, 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 before you open the engine lid on one of these cars, always raise. I see people not raise them. That causes problems. So, okay, here we go. Again, you can see the 5-blade fan on the car. I'm going to call out the builder on this car. I like these paper hoses. Those are kind of the correct, it's hard to find the right finish on those. Those look really, really nice. Again, to an untrained eye, it's going to look very, very similar to a 911 SC here in the US. They never came with an air pump. SCs and later 76 and 77 911s here had an air pump, so they'll have a different pulley configuration to run the air pump, which would have sat here. Again, these cars never had emissions equipment because they were not US legal. So again, this is what the engine bay is going to look like on these cars. I'm going to walk you over to the white car because it has a couple things that I think are worthy of calling out in its engine bay. So the biggest thing you'll notice, it looks more traditional. It has an 11-blade fan. So if you're trying to score points for originality, you're going to lose there. However, this car, the owner drives this car. He lives in a very hot climate. He wanted the additional 11-blade fan. And one of the other things he did with this particular car is he added the Carrera oil cooler, which debuted for 1984, and for the first time ever added a fan, a thermostatically controlled fan to the front oil cooler. So every 3-liter Carrera came standard with a trombone oil cooler. It sounds very advanced, folks, but it was not. It's literally a loop of material shaped like a trombone. So the oil runs to the front of the car, air basically runs over this trombone and cools the oil. The problem is if you live somewhere hot and humid, you're stuck in traffic, you have no air movement, they just simply run hotter than you'd like them to run. What is a good oil temperature on these cars? I like to see them around 190 degrees. In stop and go traffic, I might see it at 210. If you're regularly seeing north of 210, I get a little bit anxious. So for a driven car, I like an 11-blade fan. I think that's a nice upgrade. Okay, so since we know the secret sauce is this magical 930-02 engine, how the heck do you tell that you actually have a 930-02 engine? So let's get down to brass tacks here. So there's going to be two things that are going to be important to know. The very first one, and this car is actually nice, not being an AC car, we can hopefully see this. Your engine number is right here. So let's see if I can read that. I'm getting old, you know my eyes. Okay, 6670692. You'll notice a couple things about this engine number. They always start with a star, and they were hand stamped. So you'll notice they're slightly crooked. So if you're looking to tell if it looks authentic, it'll look hand stamped. It'll generally be slightly crooked, and the engine number will always start with a 6, meaning 6-cylinder. The next number will be a 6, denoting that it is a Carrera motor, and then the third digit would indicate the model year. So we would know it's a 6-cylinder for the first digit. 6 would be the fact it's a Carrera motor, and the third digit being a 7 would be 1977 model year. Now, oftentimes people ask me, well, gosh, does the engine number line up with the VIN number? No, it does not, but there is some general correlation. It's going to be kind of in the range. So I recall correctly, this car is like number 504 or something like that. And so you'll notice the engine number 692. So it's, 190 numbers off, something like that. The other big thing you're going to notice, and again, new cameras are so amazing, you'll notice it says 930-02. It's stamped right here. You want to see that. Hopefully do I need to move that out of the way?
Yeah, the focus, yeah, there we go. There we go.
Oh, look at that. I love it. Okay, so when you're shopping for one of these cars, this is going to be really, really important, because if you're trying to buy secret sauce, you want to make sure it's got the secret recipe. So there you go, engine numbers. That's what you're looking for. So if you're looking at the engine bay, hopefully I've given you some good tips. Okay, now we're going to get into the business end of a Carrera 3-liter. And again, this is not going to be a comprehensive PPI video. I would encourage you to watch my 911SC inspection video, because 95% of what pertains on that car is going to be very similar to what we're going to look for on these cars. Whenever I'm underneath the car, the one thing I do always think about is rust. That question always comes up. Do note, 1976 was the introduction of a fully galvanized body on these cars, so they are not typically prone to rust. However, most of these cars live their lives in Europe. In many parts of Europe, they do have road salt and stuff, so you're going to definitely be wanting to look for rust, but nowhere near as prone as cars built prior to 1976 in that regard. A couple things I'm going to call out. The vast majority of these cars will have SSI heat exchangers that look like this. However, in fact, I can't feature one who doesn't, because every single car has SSIs here today. But they actually originally would have come with a different style heat exchanger and then a 1-in, 1-out muffler. They'll add a little bit of power, and they'll run a little better with SSIs. These are stainless. It's a great upgrade on the car, but technically, again, not how they would have come. A couple other little minor changes. They did add an Omega spring for 1977 to slightly reduce clutch effort. You can see that here. And then while we're here, we can show engine or transmission numbers. You can see how transmission numbers are stamped. They have two different types of transmissions. Well, actually, I take that back. They have a couple. Let's touch about these things. So in 1976, they came with what's called a 915-44 for the manual transmission, 5-speed cars. And then in 1977, they went to a 915-61. Same gear ratio, slightly stronger synchros. I really can't tell the difference, but you can see the transmission type. Again, this is a 77, so a 915-61. Oddly enough, they did have a couple other transmission choices in these cars. The standard actually was a 4-speed. You could have gotten a 4-speed on these cars. I don't know what the production numbers on the 4-speed are. Fairly unusual. Why you would want one, I'm not quite sure. But that was available, as was the Sportomatic. Again, I don't know what production numbers are. My guess is fairly limited, but they did come with a Sportomatic. A couple other options underneath these cars. They did come with 3 possible suspension choices, which were, they came originally with Bose shocks, and then they could be optioned with Bilstein or with Koni's. This looks like a Bilstein car. I think the option code's number 474, I think is Bilstein, and I think 402 maybe are Coney's. If it's not noted on there, then it should have originally come with Bose shocks. This car actually was kind of a stripper. It's an Italian delivery car with almost no options, so it probably technically should have Bose. I'm just going to have to shame my owner, although frankly I would run Bilstein's. One other thing that's kind of fun, this car was dry ice cleaned, and so you expose some things you rarely see. So we talk a little bit about date stamps. You can see on the rear trailing arm here the date stamp on there, and it looks like it's 10 of 76, so that tells me that's original or likely original to the car. So kind of fun. Again, I would encourage you to watch the 911SC video for how to look underneath one of these cars. Let's talk a little bit more about specifications. We'll talk a little bit what comes in the front trunk, what documentation should look like, and then how to determine if your car's matching numbers. Okay, now we're going to get into the nerdy details, the stuff that your car should have come with, some interesting information out there that are kind of reference guides. A couple things I want to do. First off, I want to give a shout out to my buddy Ryan Snodgrass. I'll admit an absolute bias, but I think he did seminal work. And you're going to say, well, we're not talking about the Turbo 3.0, we're talking about the Carrera 3.0. This book, however, is probably the best reference you're ever going to find, so I'd encourage you to buy it. It's very expensive, but absolutely worth it. And the reason I say that is most everything that applies to this car would have carried over as well. So it's a great reference. Obviously, the engine stuff's going to be different, but a couple things that are kind of fun. Again, thank you, Ryan, for putting this together. Performance summary. So interestingly enough, compare the Carrera 3-liter versus the outgoing MFI car, as well as the 75 to 77 3-liter turbo. In terms of like 0 to 60, 5.5, 5.7, 6.0. So actually the turbo's the slowest, 60 miles an hour. The 3-liter car then all of a sudden ties it, at 100 kilometers, so basically 6 by 62. Very similar acceleration rates to 160 kilometers an hour. Now the boost is kicking in on the turbo. This is old leg kicking in on that turbo. All of a sudden it's a second and a half ahead at 160. But even, for example, in the quarter mile, very, very similar times, 14 and a half for the MFI, as well as the Carrera 3-liter, 14.2 for the turbo. Obviously the highest top speed going to the turbo. So very similar absolute performance, but how it delivers it, I would argue the Carrera 3-liter is the most enjoyable of the three from a daily usage, just seat of the pants, revability, torque, effortless driving, really, really fabulous. So I thought that was a good demonstration. And I've just tabbed a few other things that I find really interesting in this book that I love calling out. It talks about how to decode, for example, the gearbox numbers, would call that out. It would do it same with the engine numbers. You could find that. What else have I tabbed in here that's kind of fun? Talking about the brakes. So if you want to know, well, how are these cars braked? Well, they actually have the same rear brakes as the turbo or a 73 RS or 74 RS. However, sadly, they got the iron front calipers. So one upgrade I personally would make is I'd go to the aluminum S front calipers. I think that's a nice upgrade. But again, the book is super useful. You can flip through here on all sorts of things. I feel like I'm an infomercial, but it's, if people say, well, Nathan, how do you know all this stuff? Well, believe it or not, I believe in having source material, and this is really wonderful. We'll talk about a little bit about the part, though, the Carrera whale tail, what it looks like, what the part number for the correct whale tail should be. Again, ones with AC should have the larger, rear vent area on them if it's an AC car. So it should look like this or that. Now, I did forget to call out, in 1977, they did change the rear spoiler. We don't have one here, and thank God. Now, if you own this car, I'm just going to apologize in advance, but you have an ugly spoiler. The 77 spoiler, it's 100% rubber. Even me, who's a stickler for originality, if I had the correct 77 spoiler on my car, I would be apt to put the whale tail on it. It's just a much more attractive piece. Why Porsche went to that rubberized spoiler, I will never know. Again, big fan of that. Close second would be the Carrera 2.7 book. It covers through 1976, has a lot of information shared with these cars. But if you're going to pick one, if you own a Carrera 3-liter, I would pick this book. Other thing, we just did a quick printout in terms of production numbers, because I actually sat down with a gentleman who runs the registry last night. We were debating this, and I have made the argument that the published information regarding production numbers on these cars is wrong. Previously, it's been published at 3,691 examples. I'm going to make the official proclamation in my opinion, and I would love for someone to prove me wrong, but I think I'm right, at 3,651 copies. And the reason for that is all the previous guides always started production with VIN number 001. However, Porsche, for series production in this era, started with VIN number 11, reserving the first 10 VINs for internal company use. So I believe total production would be 3651. However, if you're watching this video and you own a car with a VIN less than 11, please reach out. I would love to be wrong. Okay, so let's talk about some other fun things that came with the car. They came obviously with a folio in the front, generally in the glove box. Here, of course, would have been what the owner's manual would have looked like. These, of course, were sold rest of world, so the owner's manual generally came in the language of the delivering country, whether that be they were sold new in Japan, they were sold new in Germany, they were sold new in Italy or France. So these come in, of course, multiple languages. They generally should be stamped at the original delivering dealer. And if you're really, really lucky, they'll actually have recorded the original engine number. So, for example, this book comes from the yellow car behind me, and that is still its original number. So that's kind of a useful. And then there's a little fun fact where you can tell where it was originally delivered. So this was originally delivered at Autohaus Max Moritz, who, if you follow Porsche, has kind of a fun history. They were the first entity to do the slip-fit 3.2 liter P's and C's for these cars. Kind of fun connection with Porsche history. So that's what that would have looked like. Of course, you could get, for example, the Porsche production specification from Porsche. These, of course, are much more modern. I'm going to go on record, I'm not a big fan of these. These are oftentimes wrong, so please take them with a grain of salt. They're sort of interesting to hang on your wall, but you can see it does call out how this car was originally optioned. And again, you can see this car was actually pretty heavily optioned when it was new, what that might look like. So the one car we were just looking underneath was this silver car. And I want to pull this car out because this is interesting. I'm a big fan for documentation. We do have the production specification here, just a quick summary. As I called out, this car is kind of an absolute strippy, delivered new to Italy. It did have the 5-speed transmission, tinted glass, fog lights, and Dunlop tires. A lot of people ask what tires these came on. They could have come on Dunlops, they could have come on Pirelli CN36s, or the 77s predominantly came on the Pirelli P7 tires, as well as, again, those few 15-inch P7s that were delivered in 1976. But what's fun about this particular car is the documentation on this car is sort of off the charts. We do have photos all through time, but one thing that's fun, you'll notice in this photo, I'm going to try to find a better one. Oh, it's on its original cookie cutters. We talked about that. Rarely do you see cookie cutters, but oftentimes we don't have an idea of what true mileage on these cars are. I consider almost all of them to be true mileage unknown. This car's got really good documentation through its whole history, and you can flip through everything, what the cars looked like over time and all the service. So this would get me kind of excited. Again, I'm not that worried about mileage on these cars. They've mostly been restored, but it is kind of neat to see that we can prove it. For example, here's a photo of the car from 1997, so I can see what it looked like back then. Still sitting in Italy, kind of a neat deal. Let's set that aside. Let's talk a little bit about the trunk accessories. Unfortunately, I didn't find a perfect toolkit to show you, so we're just going to go for one that's complete and correct. It's a little dirtier than I would normally want to feature, but these are not my cars. So, okay, so this is what a correct toolkit would look like. It should say Juicin on the inside, or Justin, or however you want to pronounce that. That's what that would look like. It would, of course, have a fan belt, would generally be an opti belt. You can see what that would have looked like as a correct belt. It would come with 5 open-end wrenches. It would have a screwdriver with 3 blades. We're missing 1 blade in this kit. 76 would have a slightly different style spark plug socket. It would be smooth. It would not have the spring. 77, they went to this style. They would have a tow hook with a little tag that shows where the tow hook plugs in. Now, for my eagle-eyed North American viewers, we never got this style tow hook in our toolkit because our ugly bumperette covered the tow hook on our cars, so we didn't get the tow hook. Again, 22 millimeter. You have your open end, or your pliers, your 10 millimeter Allen, as well as your spanner wrench. So that's, again, what the toolkit would have looked like in period. A couple things that we don't have here that just weren't in the cars. You would, of course, got the yellow OFX glove bag, as well as a BF Goodrich clear plastic bag, which would have been used for your spare tire. When, let's say you had a flat, you use your air pump, you pump it up, and people say, what do I get this plastic bag for? That's because you get to put the old wheel and tire inside the car, because when it's complete, it doesn't fit in the front trunk. So that's how they solved, I guess, that problem. And then the tire compressor would have been this style. This is what the tire compressor would look like for an original car. I'll show you what that tag is. And then the cars generally also would have come with a first aid kit, as well as a warning triangle, which would kind of complete, you know, all the accessories that they would have come with from the factory. Okay, we've looked at what comes in the car, a couple good resources. I want to point you to really what's going to ultimately be the best resource for these cars. Is a really passionate individual kind of rebrought this back to life. It's the Carrera 3.0 registry, and you can find them online, Carrera30.net. Please, if you have one of these cars, register your car. We're trying to track them. And again, if you have a car with less than VIN number 11, please reach out. I'd love that. And do find me if you happen to have my magical great color sport seat 76 Targa. I'm not picky at all, so you know my standards are very low. I'd love to have one, but great group. I want to thank them. They have helped put together these cars today, so we can take the car that we're calling the forgotten 911, and now it's going to be the much vaunted 911. And now, let's go drive.
So, Nathan, I was behind the camera. I'm still technically behind the camera here. On these drives, we've been doing them together a little bit. On the drives we've done, I've been more familiar with the cars. You know, some of the newer water-cooled stuff. I don't know anything about Carrera 3.0s. Never been in one. Kinda, sorta knew about them. And so, what would I expect behind the wheel of something like this? Is it gonna handle better than something in period, or from what it sounds like, is it more of like the engine is the main party piece?
Yeah, so that's actually a great point, because you know I've been so excited about this car throughout the whole video. You know, some people think I'm just a fanboy and I'm only going to say good things. So I'll start with, I guess, the I don't want to say the letdown on the car, but from a driving perspective, suspension tuning, brakes, transmission, all that basically shared with any 911, 911S period, and so it's going to feel very similar to that car in terms of, you know, steering feel, brake feel, which is all quite good. However, I will say there's probably not my favorite generation of 911 in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, the pace of change and development was pretty slow in this period. You know, I think if anything, they're definitely a little bit under braked. One of the things I mentioned earlier in the video is they have the same rear brakes as the turbo, although arguably the turbo was still kind of under braked in this period until 78. But so same brakes as the 75 to 77 turbo in the back, but in the front, same swept area and all that. But they have the heavier iron calipers. So one upgrade I would definitely make one of these cars, I'd put the aluminum calipers on them. Yeah. But they're a very comfortable car to drive. Yeah. They do have a fair amount of body roll, so you know, much like the cars where you drive them, you sort of they're slow in, fast out, like all these cars are. But really, they still have a fair amount of roll and weight transfer. So unfortunately, where we're at today, we don't get a lot of time in the twisties. But basically the way you set this car up is you kind of come in slow, come off the brakes, let the car transition and sort of move over, and then you put the power down. And that's where it gets interesting, because now this 3-liter motor, the torque difference is appreciably stronger than either the 2.7 car more certainly than a turbo where you're kind of waiting to spool it up. And with the 4-speed cars, particularly on low-speed corners on the turbos, you're constantly kind of off boost, and particularly those 3-liter cars, 6.5 to 1 compression, they're pretty uninspired in that mode. And so, you know, working in the twisty bits, this is a much more enjoyable car. Unfortunately, just the geography where we're at today, not a lot of twisties. We're going to hopefully get out a little bit of country road here. But the motor itself, as soon as you start it up, you notice a few things. It sounds cammier. It's got a little bit of a rougher idle.
I'm gonna pull up next to our host here.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay. So again, it's a little bit cammier. That's the first thing you notice. The other big difference with the lighter flywheel and the crank, it revs up a little faster, so you'll see it on the acceleration run. It just feels so much stronger than your typical SC.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, your typical SC just feels a little more damped than that. Like it's, you know, and I have an SC. It's an 81 US car. It's lovely.
Yeah.
I really like it, but it just doesn't have an edge.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very smooth. You know, the term people use that I always deride them for is bulletproof.
Yeah.
But they just feel really robust. But this car feels snappy in a way that.
You know what I sort of equate this to now that I'm thinking about it? It's not like, you know, when BMW had the E36, they had the 325 IS and then
Yes.
the M3, but
Yep.
there was the Euro M3.
Bingo.
And then the US M3. The US M3, it was like a massaged sort of, what was it, the S52, I believe it was.
Exactly, yeah. It was a
And-
massaged M52, which
or
they
a massaged
relabeled
M52
S52, yes.
Exactly. And
So-
this just reminds me of like a lightly hot rodded, something like, if you don't want to go crazy, but you want a little bit more oomph and character and feeling.
Yeah, like, you just don't get that
Nice.
kind of snap
Yeah.
with an SC.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And again, I always remind people, even the most hot roddy air-cooled car isn't like fast by today's standards. If you want fast, buy a new GT3 or something.
Yeah.
However, the character is just really good.
Yeah, she pulls.
Yeah,
Man, it rides really well.
yeah, they're easy to live with.
Yeah.
The other thing that's nice is it's easy to get the rev match with that light flywheel.
Uh-huh.
That
Yep.
part's good.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I would definitely prefer this over an SC. You know, at least from the passenger seat.
Absolutely. And it's got good tractability. I did kind of a little bit of a roll through in second gear, and then
Yeah. So stock, I think you were saying they came with a 4-speed, or not stock, I mean, yes, stock, but unless you had the option for a 5-speed manual, it came with a 4-speed.
Yeah, it came
have
with
you
a
driven
4-speed.
a 4-speed?
you know, I have
You
not.
haven't?
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean they're just
interesting.
such a rare bird.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, so what are the differences? You know, does the shift feel worse or better? But yeah,
You know, it
so
might-
really rare to find a 4-speed.
It actually might be interesting. I suspect actually shift action might be a little better because you don't have that third plane.
Yeah.
I know, like I've driven quite a few early 911s and 912s with 4-speeds, and they're
Yeah.
kind of lovely actually.
Yeah.
I'd have to study the gear ratio chart and see. I
Yeah.
suspect they span the gears, and so it may be less snappy.
Yeah. All right, probably good to turn around now, yeah? Yeah.
That's good.
Let's turn around and we'll do a little more on the way back. Awesome. So the other thing is, remind me about these sport seats as well. They're, when did Porsche introduce these?
1974. So they had these
Yeah.
seats from 1974 until 1980.
Yeah, and you could get these in US cars as well,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Gotcha.
And oddly enough, you could actually get them individually left or right. So if you want a really rare bird, find one of these cars, you know, not just square 3 liters, but you could have ordered, for
Yeah.
example, you could order one just for the right side.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I saw a car the other day that was specified with right side sports seat.
things, except for the fact that this was never sold new in America and the U.S. It almost is kind of like an RS America in the sense that, you know, the RS America, I guess, had the suspension and lightness, and not the engine. But this has that lightly breedline engine, but not the suspension and lightness.
Yeah.
Although it was lighter than a turbo and kind of keep up, you know, maybe at lower RPMs.
Well, I will say, you know, having driven quite a few 2.7 liter RS cars over the years, as well as the 2.7 MFI 74 to 76 Carrera cars.
Yep.
This car definitely feels in that vein. I think the difference was too, like when I kind of say that, you know, the suspension and brakes aren't improved over the standard 911S, one has to remember that a lot of that development came with the G body in general. And so, for example, when the 73 RS came out, the more basic 911s had different suspension tuning, and so, you know, it was, everything kind of moved up a grade. And I'm also looking at it through a more modern lens, having driven later, for example, G model cars, and of course, you know, 964s and 993s. You know, I will say, you know, I've said this in videos before. I mean, I love all generations of 911, but my favorite ones to drive, if I'm being really honest, are the 70 and 71 cars. I really like the lightness, and I like the revvy nature of the motors.
Yeah, that 2.2, I think you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I really like those cars, particularly with like a period build 2.7, 2.8, or maybe a 2.5 short stroke, something like that, real high revving. I do not like those cars with big displacement. But this car feels more that direction versus one of the issues I have with, for example, a 3.2 liter G50 car, which is it's a lovely car, but it's not a particularly like pulse racing car. Like my pulse doesn't go up. When I drive it, I'm impressed with it. I'm kind of enamored with its kind of.
But it's not like the engine feels super special compared to this.
No, it's you know, very smooth and
more of a mid-range car. Right?
Yeah, like it's a really easy car to live with.
Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned in our walk around there that we had, so the 2.7 MFI had better throttle response. This is CIS, which normally has not quite as good. Is that what you're feeling here? Like, what's the percentage, I guess? Like, how much of this throttle response, how close does it get to the 2.7 RS?
That's your biggest differentiator, particularly on just that absolute initial first tip in.
Like, I thought I felt it, and now that we're paying attention to it,
I mean, you can feel, like, if you jump on it, it goes, but there's just
it's like, not a snap, it's like a push almost. And
2.7 RS still feels even cammier at the top. It has a more of a shrieked red line above, like, say, 5,500 RPM. This car's a more linear, although this one definitely feels cammier than an SC, and certainly more than a 3.2. 3.2s, if anything, feel, and I guess they sacrificed. That's not the right word. It's a trade-off, right? You got greater drivability and smoothness, and probably and more low end. Again, you're talking to a guy who's biased. I mean, this is in my blood. These cars speak to me. Many of you know my very first 911 was a 75. Now, it was a lot of people don't know this, but it was a 75 911, not even an S. It was a base. We only offered the base here in the U.S. in 74, but mine was a German market, so a gray market, 75. So it had 143 horsepower, 2.7, not particularly revvy. They had 8-to-1 compression, pretty mild cams. I mean, amazing car as a teenager, certainly. I mean, I loved the car. But I think, okay, this car at 200 horsepower, I mean, that's 40% more power, and I would have died to have had this car then. I mean, I still die to have this car now, but what a game changer.
And 200, you know, back then, that was, especially in the 70s, that was, nobody was doing that, except for Porsche, I feel like.
Dark times. I mean, you know, we had American V8 muscle cars with, 130 horsepower. I guess you can't even call that a muscle car. I'm embarrassed for them.
Yeah.
If anything, the only good thing they had is they had, you know, huge torque numbers. You know, they
Yeah, I
were
was
like,
going to say 120 horsepower, 250 pound-feet.
or more, like
Or
something
more.
like 300. You're like,
Yeah.
man, that, talk about being choked down.
Yeah.
Dark days.
Dark days, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think this is our one nice turn on
Yeah.
this drive.
Yeah, I'm very spoiled. I live in the Northwest. We've got amazing roads, and
Yeah.
yeah, but you can see and feel sort of the weight transfer. And,
Yeah.
you can even see in the 3.0 we're following, you know. He's pulling me though.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely feel a little bit more roll, you know, to carve its time.
Oh yeah.
But, you know, it can keep up with modern traffic.
Oh, that it certainly can.
Yeah.
Well, Damon, I have to say I feel pretty blessed. I get to do some amazing things, and one of the things I just love doing,
Yeah.
I just love getting out and driving these cars.
Yeah.
And this car, it lives up to the hype. You know, I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes, and I try to be real honest in my reviews, sometimes I'll drive a car and I'm like, doesn't live up to the hype. But this car,
Yeah.
it has everything I like about the feel of a mid-year,
Yeah.
but with sort of the rev-happy nature,
Yeah.
torquey, or just secret sauce. And I probably overuse that expression, but I don't have a better one, so that's what you're going to get.
It's a secret sauce.
So if you're going to get the opportunity to drive one of these cars, or one of these cars speaks to you, I would advise someone pick one up. I think the market's going to change on these cars. I think it's going to move upward as people realize how special they are. So again, I would absolutely encourage you to pick one up.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is one that you'll have to import unless, you know, you're buying it from somebody who's already done so. And there's probably plenty still in Europe.
Well, I don't know if there's plenty.
Maybe not plenty.
You know,
Still pretty rare.
3,651 cars.
Yeah,
and
I
a
guess
lot
not
of them
too
didn't
much.
survive.
Ah.
So, yeah, it's sort of a
So they're a well-kept secret here in America, but perhaps not for too long.
not for too long, sadly.
Yeah.
I'm part of the problem. So I should end this. It's a terrible car. No one should buy one. I'll take one off your hands because I'm a giving and loving individual. So if you have one, and I'll pay you salvage value for it or something,
Yeah.
just you know, not make you suffer.